So welcome, hi. Today we're going to be talking about evolution. The goals of today's lecture are to look at what evolution is. We'll talk about the mechanism, some of the qualities to make evolution work, and we'll also talk a little bit about the history. In class we'll do a little bit more of the details. We'll do some more of the kind of more complex evolution in class, but these are just kind of some general overview of what evolution is. So first off, what is evolution? Evolution is change over time to genetics in response to the environment. So evolution is really based all around the idea of change over time. So things are changing. For example, you changed, you grew and developed. You are not the same person your grandparents were. You change over time. It's changing your genetics, your genes, your DNA in response to things happening around you, your environment. So this can include behavior, which is something we talked about with the last writing prompt, but the idea is that you're changing in response to the stuff around you. So a lot of people like to bring up the idea of evolution is false, evolution is a problem, it's just a theory, it's not real. But a lot of times when you see their arguments, they're not really arguing that things change, they're arguing something else. So what are some things that evolution is not? Here are a couple of things that evolution is not. Evolution is not an origin story. Evolution is not say that we came from a primordial soup. That's a different argument. Evolution says that we change over time, which is true. We can look at humans, we can look at other organisms, and look at even bacteria and say that yes, they change over time. They're not the same that they started with. So in our origin story, we know that evolution is not that. It does not say where humans came from. It does not say where paramecium came from. It does not say where plants came from. Origin story is totally different, and we'll talk about some of that stuff in class, such as primordial soup, and some of the very first ideas of what people thought about in science. Evolution does not have to do with religion. It is not pre the existence of a higher power. You can totally believe in religion and still believe in evolution. In fact, there's a lot of people that God must be involved, because how else could you come up with something as sweet as evolution? However, I'm not here to talk about religion. I'm just here to say that evolution and religion can coexist. We do not need to be at combat with each other. Evolution does not say anything about religion, such as how we should behave or have a moral code. Evolution is not a reason to defend morals. So there's something called social Darwinism. Darwin was a guy who eventually came up with the mechanism of evolution. He said that there's a quote-unquote survival of the fittest. But evolution does not dictate that the better, stronger people should dominate the weak. A lot of people believe, okay, we're a superior race, thinking back to Gattaca, being a better kind of person. It does not mean that just because you're rich you can eliminate people below you because you are somehow more fit. So eugenics. Evolution is not morals about what is the right thing that we should do in certain situations. Lastly, intelligent design is not evolution. Those two do not go together. Evolution considers all the evidence. They consider exceptions, things that don't make sense. For example, there's a saying, why would you put a playground next to the waste disposal? Sexual reproduction and urinary systems are located within inches of each other. If things were truly intelligently designed, think of an engineer, think of somebody working in mechanics, those two would not be together. Also, there would not be any distinct organs. For example, we have a coccyx or a tailbone. We don't have this, we don't need that. The same is true of the appendix. In koalas, the appendix is really helpful for digesting lots of plant matter and a lot of really heavy leafy greens. However, in humans, we don't eat so much leafy greens, so it doesn't really help. So intelligent design and evolution do not go together. They are opposing arguments that do not fit. So evolution considers all the evidence. Intelligent design kind of tries to blend evolution with religion, and that's not what science is about. Science is about finding the truth through looking at evidence. So some people like to think about evolution having a destination. So here's some other reasons or things that evolution is not. Evolution does not have a destination. A lot of times people say, oh, it was getting closer and closer and closer to being like humans. Humans are the most quote-unquote advanced organism. It doesn't work that way. You don't decide, hey, it would be great if we had a whole bunch of wings. You don't have a destination in mind. You just wait and see what fits. It's very random in what works well in the environment. Evolution does not have a choice. You cannot choose to evolve. It's just selection, and evolution does not happen to an individual. Evolution acts on a large scale. We're talking populations, we're talking communities, we're talking whole species evolving at once. So how does that relate to these pictures we have here? But I have to evolve. Scales make me look fat. You don't have a choice in the matter. This comic tries to make it sound like you can choose to get rid of scales, to walk on land, to pick things that you want. So I can't pick, hey, it'd be great to be really smart. I don't have a choice in the matter. I get what I get. Adaptation doesn't involve trying. So this week or next week we'll be doing a thumb lab, and we'll be talking about adaptations, that it's something you have, and I can't just grow a thumb. It's whatever you have is what you have. So again, evolution does not have a destination. It doesn't have an endpoint. You can't choose the things you get, so you can't choose your mutations. They just happen. And evolution does not happen to one person. It happens to a whole population or a whole community. So these things are not evolution. A lot of people like to think, oh, you know, Mario, he's one person, he's evolved. Yes, he's changed, but he's not evolved. The other example I like to bring up is Pokemon, because everyone always says, oh, no, Pikachu evolves into Pikachu, evolves into Raichu. They change, and they grow and develop, but they do not evolve in terms of a population, because there's only one organism. A population of Pikachus could evolve, but not just one Pokemon by itself. So how does this all come about? There's a very researcher called Darwin, and so Darwin was a guy who originally, he didn't want to get a job. So this guy, think about your typical college kid, this guy didn't want to go to school, he didn't want to be a doctor, he didn't want to go on, so he took kind of a sabbatical, he went on a vacation, so to say. He decided to work for the Navy, and he worked for the he went on a trip, he went on a very long trip on the HMS Beagle, and he went around and he collected all this information and data on birds and turtles, and he ended up writing a book called The Origin of Species. And this is really important because it starts talking about how do you get species, how do you get change over time. And he starts off with talking about artificial selection. And artificial selection meaning that humans choose. They choose, you know, I want a dog with a long tail, so they breed all the dogs with long tails. I want red cows, they breed all the red cows together. I want cows with a lot of milk. So that's all artificial selection. He was the first person to kind of think of natural selection. And he almost missed out on being called the main discoverer. A couple other people also had similar ideas, but they didn't outline the mechanisms as well as Darwin did. So Darwin gets a lot of fame for this, even though he was kind of trying to just avoid his real job. But he ended up finding a lot about finches and a lot about turtles, and we'll talk about some of these finch studies in class. So what are some of the big ideas of evolution? We know that evolution occurs to populations changing over time in response to the environment. As the temperature gets warmer, animals that are better able to survive in a warm climate are more able to survive. We also know that the selection of evolution, for how evolution works, the mechanism, is through natural selection. So this is the idea that Darwin talked about. There are 4 components to natural selection. The idea is competition, meaning that organisms compete or they fight or they battle for resources. Overpopulation, meaning you have more organisms than you need. And lastly, 2 more, we have variation, meaning you're all different, and survival of the fittest, which we'll get into more detail in a moment. So what do all these things mean? The first one, competition, means that there are limited resources. So food, water, mates, space, iPads, computers, there's just not enough resources for everyone to survive. So when we talk about ecology, when we talk about population curves, there's a carrying capacity. There's only so much that you can get to. What are some examples of that? Male competition. So males fight for females. There's not enough females to go around, so you're not going to have kids, and that's kind of important for natural selection. An important part of natural selection is overproduction, meaning that you make too much. Not all the individuals are going to live. For example, we have infant mortality rate. Back in the day, back historically, there's a high mortality rate because not all kids were going to make it up to adulthood. Now we have pretty good infant mortality rates, pretty low, so most kids do grow up. But realize that if you make one seed, that one seed might not grow up. This works in humans. You can think about sperm, right? There's 10 million sperm per ejaculate. 1 is going to become a human. You have to make more than enough because not all of them are going to make it to the end. Variation means that there's differences. If differences allow things to be selected for. So if I'm a little bit taller, I'm a little bit smarter, I'm a little bit stronger, then I'm going to have an advantage and be able to be selected for. If there are no differences and everyone is the same, we can't select one gene over another. It's just random chance who survives. And that does happen. It's called genetic drift, and random chance effects do affect evolution. For the most part, it's important to have variation. If there are clones, even if there were clones, variation comes from mutation. So there's not very many people who are identical. Even monozygotic twins, meaning they're twins, they're identical, they look the same, they're born at the same time, they can still accumulate mutations from their environment that make them different. Variations come in all shapes and sizes. As you can see, there's different types of horses and chickens. Lastly, this one seems to get confused a lot, but it's called survival of the fittest. So a lot of people think of survival of the fittest as being the strongest, biggest, baddest meanie on the beach. Survival of the fittest basically says you got to be able to do 2 things: survive and have kids. If you can survive and have kids, boom, you've done survival of the fittest. It's about match for your environment. So in some cases, it does help to be the strongest, biggest, baddest person on the beach. For example, if you're crabs fighting for holes, that's a big deal. If you're a mouse trying to hide, it doesn't help to be a fat, goody yellow mouse. It helps to be a small, slender black mouse that can hide and run and get away. So survival of the fittest, there's two things. You've got to be able to live another day and have some kids. And this is related to the T-Rex. T-Rex is an amazing animal in that it was able to chase down things, but it can't play bass and it can't play banjo because it's not fit for that environment. But it can play the ukulele because it is fit to its environment. So who cares? Why do we see this? Again, we always go to applications, just like the PA paragraphs in your lab. Where do you see evolution in antibiotic resistance? So if any of you guys get sick or heard of MRSA, antibiotic resistance has to do with bacteria evolving and becoming immune to medicine. And this is something we worry about because we don't want it to spread and infect a lot of people. We worry about evolution in animals, so the variation, for example, in cows and chickens is something we can breed in agriculture. Lastly, we can talk about coevolution. So the coevolution has to do with being able to evolve to other things around you, and this is related to something called the Red Queen hypothesis. And it's related, the reason why it's called the Red Queen hypothesis is it's named after the Red Queen in Alice in Wonderland. The Red Queen is always running to stay in place. That's the argument they tell to Alice in Wonderland. And the idea is that you have to keep running to even just stay competitive. If you stop and sit down, you get thrown off. So the idea would be like running on a treadmill. You have to keep running or else the treadmill is going to kick you off. The same thing with evolution. You have to keep evolving or evolution is just going to run you over. You're not going to make it. So realize, I really like this one, this Insanity Wolf. You're the product of 4 billion years of evolution, so you should act like it, right? All those other people before you had variation, had a trait that was selected for the environment. So really do something with your life. So basically, let's kind of wrap up evolution and kind of keep these things in mind when you're walking around. Evolution is change over time. It depends on natural selection. There are 4 parts to natural selection. And evolution is applicable to your everyday life in terms of things like antibiotic resistance and coevolution, meaning that you always have to keep evolving to make something happen. So those are kind of the 3 big details I wanted to make sure you had a grasp of. In class, we'll be kind of working through this stuff in more detail, and we'll talk about some of the specifics of biogenesis and what all this stuff means. But until next time, I'll see you next week when we talk about natural selection in more detail. So take care, have a good one.